You think prosperity is having a good salary? You think it's having a new car, a big house, the ability to buy what you want when you want? You confuse consumption with wealth. You confuse the appearance of success with real substance. And while you chase empty symbols of prosperity, true prosperity, the one that lasts generations, that resists crises, that transforms entire families, is completely off your radar. I'm going to tell you something that will shatter your current understanding of financial success. 90% of people who look rich are poor. They drive expensive cars that they cannot afford. They live in houses that are financed up to their necks. They wear designer clothes, bought with a credit card. They seem prosperous. They are empty facades built on a foundation of debt, a strong wind, a small crisis, and everything falls apart. Real prosperity has nothing to do with how much you spend. It's all about how much you actually have. It has to do with assets that generate value independent of your work. It has to do with freedom. It has to do with not being 3 paychecks away from bankruptcy. And the most brutal truth of all, most people will never experience real prosperity, not for lack of opportunity, not for lack of resources, but because of a complete and utter misunderstanding of how prosperity is actually built and maintained over time. Let me explain something fundamental about human psychology and prosperity. Your brain is programmed for the short term, for immediate gratification, for social status signals. This made sense when we were hunter-gatherers living day to day. It makes no sense at all in a modern economy where prosperity is built through compounding over decades. But you still operate with cave software. You see a neighbor with a new car and feel the urge to buy a new car. You see a friend posting expensive vacations and you feel like you're falling behind. You are manipulated by instincts that are actively destroying your ability to build real wealth. And the consumer industry knows this. Modern marketing is engineering to exploit your psychological weaknesses. They sell status. They sell belonging. They sell solutions to insecurity. And you buy. And buy. And buy. And he stays poor while he feels temporarily important. When I was young, I lived in a neighborhood where half the families drove luxury cars and had impressive homes. It seemed like everyone was successful, until the crisis of 2008. Suddenly, half of these houses had for sale signs. Luxury cars were exchanged for cheap used ones. Entire families have collapsed financially. Why? Because everything was a facade. It was all leverage and debt disguised as prosperity. But there were families who didn't even blink during the crisis. They didn't have the flashiest houses. They didn't drive the newest cars. But they had something infinitely more valuable. They had real assets generating income. They had diversified investments. They had zero debt. They had what I call real prosperity. And when storms came, they didn't just survive. They prospered by buying liquidation assets from desperate people. That's the difference. False prosperity crumbles at the first sign of pressure. Real prosperity is strengthened in crises. And if you don't understand this difference, you're building a sandcastle, hoping the tide never comes in. Let's dissect the fundamental pillars of long-term prosperity. And brace yourself, because none of this is sexy. None of this generates likes on Instagram. None of this impresses strangers. But it all works, verifiably, mathematically, inevitably. First pillar, production before consumption. This is so fundamental that it should be obvious. But it's not. Because you were trained to consume first and worry about production later. You buy things you can't afford with money you don't have to impress people who don't care. And he calls it living well. Real prosperity begins with inverting this equation. You produce, you create value, you capture a portion of that value, and only then, after ensuring that you produced more than you consumed, do you consume the difference. Not the other way around. Every prosperous civilization in history is operated based on this principle. You plant it before you eat it. You build before you inhabit. You work before you rest. It's the natural order of things. But you live in a society that tells you that you can eat before planting, live before building, rest before working. And it offers you credit to do just that. Credit is a tool. It can be used to boost production. Borrowing to invest in an asset that generates more value than the cost of the loan is a smart use of credit. But you don't use credit like that. You use credit to consume, to anticipate future consumption. And every time you do this, you are stealing from yourself in the future to satisfy present impulses. And here's the brutal math. When you finance consumption, you're not just paying the price of the item. You are paying price plus interest. You're paying 20, 30, 50% more over time. So that $30,000 car, it cost $40,000. That $5,000 vacation on the card, it cost $7,000 when you finally paid. You are systematically paying premium for immediate gratification and calling it normal. Meanwhile, people building real prosperity do the opposite. She postpones consumption, invests the difference, and you earn interest instead of paying. She hopes she can even pay in cash. Or better yet, invest money and live off the returns, never touching the principal. Two paths, same initial income. One leads to perpetual debt and economic slavery. Another leads to freedom and increasing prosperity. And the difference is just order of operations, producing before consuming versus consuming before producing. Second pillar, ownership of productive assets. Prosperity does not come from having beautiful things. It comes from owning things that produce more things. A car is not active. It is a liability that depreciates. A house you live in is not an asset. It is an expense that consumes maintenance, taxes, and does not generate income. A real asset is something that puts money in your pocket. Shares of companies that pay dividends, properties you rent, businesses that generate profit, intellectual property that pays royalties. These are sources of true prosperity. And here's the secret that the rich class understands but never explains. Prosperity is measured not by how much you earn working, but by how much your assets generate while you sleep. Because work has limits, not assets. You can only work so many hours. You can only charge so much per hour. Your income ceiling via work is finite and relatively low. But assets can grow exponentially. They can be leveraged. They can compost indefinitely. They have no upper limit other than the size of the global economy. So while you're accumulating liabilities, expensive cars and electronics that lose half their value the moment they leave the store, people building real prosperity are accumulating assets. And the difference in financial trajectory between these two approaches over decades is astronomical. I saw twin brothers, same family, same education, same initial opportunities. One focused on appearing successful, bought a big house. Imported car, expensive clothes, vacations in Instagrammable places. The other focused on building assets. He lived in a modest apartment, drove a used car, invested difference aggressively in stocks and rental properties. 20 years later, first, you're still paying your mortgage. Change your car every 5 years and get new financing. He lives paycheck to paycheck despite earning well, prisoner of the lifestyle he built. Secondly, your portfolio generates more passive income than your salary. He could retire tomorrow if he wanted. You have complete freedom. And ironically, he can now buy any car he wants. But he chooses not to because he understands that a car is not a measure of prosperity. Which of the two is really prosperous? Which do you want to be? Third pillar, patience and composition. Real prosperity is not built in months or years. It is built over decades. It requires patience that borders on the supernatural in a society addicted to instant gratification. Compound interest is the most powerful force in finance. Einstein supposedly called it the eighth wonder of the world. But composition takes time, a long time, and for most of that time it feels like nothing is happening. You invest $1,000 a month for 5 years. There's $60,000 plus some return. It looks linear. It seems insignificant, but continue for another 5 years. Now it has $120,000 plus return on return. Continue for another 10. Now it has $400,000 and growth is accelerating exponentially. Continue for another 10. You have over $1 million, and each year adds more than your annual contributions. This is the power of composition. But 95% of people never try it because they don't have the patience to reach the inflection point where growth becomes exponential. They invest for 2-3 years. They see modest growth, they become discouraged. Stop. Or worse, they sell everything to buy some shit they don't need. And they restart from scratch. And they are stuck in the linear phase forever. Real prosperity requires that you plant a tree knowing that shade will be enjoyed by an older version of you or even your children. It requires you to make sacrifices today to benefit decades into the future. And most can't do this because they are operating with a cave mentality that only values immediate reward. But here's the irony. The longer you wait to start, the more brutal the math becomes. Starting at 20 is exponentially more effective than starting at 40 because you have 20 additional years of writing. And these initial 20 years, when amounts are small, are the most important because they establish the basis on which everything else is built. So if you're 30 and haven't started, you've already lost a decade of songwriting. But better to start now than waste another decade. And if you're 40 and haven't started, the situation is more desperate but not impossible. It just requires more aggressive sacrifice to make up for lost time. Fourth pillar, diversification of sources of prosperity. Fragile prosperity comes from a single source. Robust prosperity comes from multiple uncorrelated sources. Do you only have a salary? You are one event away from losing everything. Company fails, industry changes, you get sick, income goes to zero. But if you have a salary, stock dividends, rental income, side business, and perhaps intellectual property royalties, losing a font is inconvenient, not catastrophic. You have resilience. You have real security. And here's something few realize. Diversification isn't just about protecting against losses. It's about capturing different opportunities. Different assets perform well in different economic conditions. Stocks do well when the economy grows. Bonds do well when there is uncertainty. Real estate does well with inflation. Commodities do well in scarcity. Business does well when you find unmet demand. Having exposure to all of these ensures that no matter what happens in the economy, some part of your portfolio is thriving. This is not cowardice. It's a smart strategy that separates those who build lasting wealth from those who see fortunes evaporate in each crisis. I saw people who made a fortune in the real estate boom lose everything when the market collapsed because they had 100% in real estate. I saw people win a lot in the stock bull market and lose everything in a crash because they were completely focused. I've seen entrepreneurs build empires only to see them disappear when the industry changed because they didn't diversify. Concentration can create wealth quickly, but diversification preserves wealth over time. And preservation is more important than creation because lost wealth is exponentially more difficult to rebuild than wealth never created. Fifth pillar, lifestyle control. Here is a trap that destroys prosperity for practically everyone. When income increases, expenses increase proportionately. You earn 10% more, you spend 10% more. Net income, zero progress towards real prosperity. This phenomenon is called lifestyle inflation. And it's poison. It's why doctors, lawyers, executives making hundreds of thousands a year still live paycheck to paycheck. They earn more, they spend more, they never build a solid asset base because any increase in income is immediately absorbed by increased expenses. Bigger house, most expensive car, more luxurious vacations, more expensive restaurants, branded clothes. And suddenly, despite earning 5-10 times more than the average, they have the same percentage left at the end of the month. Nothing. Real prosperity requires that you deliberately maintain a lifestyle below what you can afford. May you resist lifestyle inflation, that when you get a 20% increase, you live as if you had earned 5 and invest the difference. This requires control that borders on the superhuman in a society that constantly bombards you with messages to spend. But it is absolutely essential, because the difference between those who build prosperity and those who remain imprisoned is not how much they earn, that's how much they save and invest. I met an executive earning $500,000 a year, broken, stressed. I couldn't sleep at night. Why? Because I had committed every penny to a huge mortgage, 3 luxury cars, a very expensive private school for my children, and an all-consuming lifestyle. He was a golden prisoner. I couldn't leave a job I hated because I was stuck with massive fixed expenses. I also knew a teacher earning $50,000 a year. He retired at 50 with $2 million invested. As he lived on $30,000, invested 20 for 25 years. Compounding and lifestyle control have created freedom that executives earning 10 times as much will never have. Which of these has real prosperity? The answer should be obvious, but it's not. Because you have been conditioned to measure success by visible consumption, not invisible freedom. Sixth pillar, continuous financial education. You cannot build prosperity with ignorance. You need to understand how money works, how taxes work, how investments work, how the economy works. And you need to keep learning because rules change, markets evolve, opportunities arise. But most people stop learning about finance after getting their first job. They operate on the knowledge of a teenager for the rest of their lives, and they wonder why they don't prosper while others who are no smarter do. The difference is not IQ, it's an investment in knowledge. Foot SSOA Building Prosperity reads books about finance, study taxes, understands different asset classes, keep track of the economy. Not because it's fun, but because it's necessary, because ignorance costs a fortune over a lifetime. And here's something that should infuriate you. The educational system doesn't teach any of this. You spend 16, 20 years at school, learn calculus that you will never use, learn the history of dead civilizations, but no one teaches you how compound interest works. Nobody explains the difference between active and passive. Nobody shows how taxes really work. Why? Because financially educated citizens are dangerous to the status quo. They ask questions. They do not accept being exploited. They build independence. And the system does not want independent citizens. It wants dependent consumers who work, spend, pay taxes, and never question structure. So financial education is left for you to pursue on your own. And most people don't look and remains ignorant. And he remains poor and blame the system without realizing that the system is working exactly as it was designed. Seventh pillar, intergenerational transmission. Truly lasting prosperity doesn't end with you. It is passed on to the next generation. And not just material wealth, but knowledge and values that allowed us to build this wealth. A family rich for generations is not rich by luck. She's rich because she teaches her children about money, because it creates heritage preservation structures, because it not only provides assets, but financial education that allows you to multiply these assets instead of wasting them. But most families don't do this. Parents never discuss money with their children. Or worse, they model destructive financial behavior. They spend impulsively. They complain about money constantly. They live in perpetual financial stress. And children absorb this, and they replicate patterns. And the cycle of financial mediocrity continues generation after generation. Breaking this cycle requires that you not only build prosperity for yourself, but that you deliberately teach the next generation to preserve and multiply. It requires you to model healthy financial behavior. It requires you to have uncomfortable conversations about money. It requires that you resist the temptation to spoil children with things instead of educating them about value. I saw family fortunes of multiple generations evaporate in one generation because grandparents built it, parents preserved it, but did not educate children. Grandchildren inherited wealth without the wisdom to maintain it. They spent in 5 years what it took 50 to build. I have also seen modest families build dynasties over generations because each generation taught the next. Material wealth can fluctuate, but knowledge and values remained. And they allowed us to rebuild whenever necessary. Real prosperity is measured not in years, but in generations. And if you're not thinking in terms of decades and generations, you're not thinking about true prosperity. You're thinking about glorified consumption. 8th pillar, resilience and adaptability. Economy changes, technology changes, opportunities come and go. Durable prosperity requires the ability to adapt without losing foundation. You can't get attached to the specific way of generating income. You need to develop the ability to generate value in multiple ways. Transferable skills, continuous learning mindset, willingness to pivot when necessary. I saw people lose entire careers to automation and become desperate because they only knew how to do one thing. I've seen others ride multiple waves of technological change because they never stopped learning and adapting. The world does not owe you stability. The world changes relentlessly, and you either move with it or are left behind. Real prosperity includes building adaptability that ensures that no matter what changes, you can continue to create value. This means investing in yourself constantly. New skills, new knowledge, new perspective. That means not getting comfortable. Don't get complacent. Keep growing until the last day. And it means building assets in multiple areas so that if one industry collapses, you don't collapse with it. Diversification, not just of financial assets, but of sources of value and relevance in the world. 9th pillar, purpose beyond accumulation. Here's something that sounds contradictory, but is profoundly true. More lasting prosperity comes when you stop focusing on just accumulating and start focusing on creating real value for others. I'm not talking about stupid altruism where you give everything. I'm talking about recognizing that money is a byproduct of value created. The more value you create for others, the more money flows back. And authentically created value is more sustainable than extracted or manipulated value. Businesses built purely on squeezing the most out of customers eventually collapse. Businesses built on actually solving problems thrive for generations. Car rules built on politics and appearance stagnate. Careers built on real competence grow indefinitely. So, paradoxically, focusing only on getting rich tends to produce less prosperity than focusing on creating genuine value with enrichment as a byproduct. This is not romanticism. It's practical observation. The most prosperous people I've met are not the greediest. They are the ones that created the most value for the most people, and they were compensated proportionally by market. 10th pillar, protection against yourself. The biggest enemy of your prosperity is not government. It's not economics. It's not luck. And you, your impulses, your fears, your greed, your impatience, your need for social approval. Real prosperity requires that you build systems that protect you from yourself. Automating investments so you can't spend impulsively. Structures that make it difficult to access accumulated capital. Rules you follow even when emotions scream to break. Because you will have moments of weakness. You'll want to buy something stupid. You will panic in a crash and want to sell everything. You will get greedy and boom and want to leverage too much. And if you have easy access to do these things, you will do them. And it will destroy years of progress in a moment of emotion. So lasting prosperity includes recognizing your own weaknesses and building barriers that force you to do the right thing even when you don't want to. This is deep humility. Recognize that you cannot trust yourself completely, that you need external structure to compensate for internal flaws. But this humility is what separates those who build wealth from those who lose it as quickly as they gained it. Now let's integrate all of this. Long-term prosperity is not an event. It's process. It's system. It is a set of principles consistently applied over decades. It starts with producing more than you consume. How to convert difference into productive assets. With patience to let composition work. With diversification to protect against uncertainty. With lifestyle control to maximize accumulation rate. With continuous education to make better decisions. With transmission to the next generation. With adaptability to navigate change. Focused on creating real value. And with protection against your own weaknesses. It's not complicated, but it's difficult because it requires making different choices than 95% of the population. It requires sacrificing social approval for real security. It requires thinking in decades when everyone thinks in days. And most don't do that. Most choose to appear prosperous instead of being prosperous. Choose immediate gratification over future freedom. Choose present comfort over long-term security. And then he wonders why, at 60, he has nothing but debts and regrets. Here is my final ultimatum to you. Define prosperity correctly. Not as the ability to consume, but as freedom to choose, like the absence of economic coercion, how to have options when others don't, and then build toward that definition relentlessly. Cut out everything that doesn't contribute. Invest aggressively in everything you contribute. Ignore what others think. Ignore how you compare socially. Focus only on the metric that matters. Are you more economically free today than yesterday? Yes or no? If yes, continue. If not, change something. That's the only question that matters. An honest answer to that question determines your financial destiny. Do you want prosperity that lasts? Who survives crises? What frees you and potentially future generations? So stop looking for symbol and start building substance. Stop impressing strangers and start building security. Stop consuming and start producing. It's not glorious. It doesn't make for an interesting dinner story. No one will admire you in your first 20 years. But in 30, 40 years, when you're free and they're still in prison, you'll know you made the right choice. And if you don't do this, you'll have a life of empty appearances. From working until your body fails, from perpetual financial stress, of dependence on systems that don't care about you, of dying poor despite having earned millions throughout his life. The choice is yours. Real prosperity or illusion of prosperity. Freedom or golden prison. Substance or symbol. But choose now. Because every year wasted is a decade of lost composition, and time is the one resource you never get back.